um, thank you so much. Sigali Nyongits Yojigil, Yudanalo Onyat Daaga Nation. My name is Kristi White. My actual traditional name is Yojiga, which means cloud. And I'm from the Onyata Aga Nation, which is the Oneida Nation, which is of the Haudenosaunee people, which is a little bit different than the Ojibwe people. Because again, we have different tribal nations and stuff. First off, I'd like to start by saying thank you guys so much for inviting me. And thank you so much for, just spending some time with me on a Sunday afternoon. I just really appreciate it. And the welcome is just, oh my goodness. And thank you so much for the congratulations on the award. I had lots of women reach out. It is incredible. I will start with the award because that'll feed right into what we're here to talk about. I did find out I'm actually one of very few Indigenous women who have received this award. I had no idea. It's funny, after I was nominated for it and then they chose me in that whole process, I started learning more about it because I actually didn't know much about this award because not many women in our community had actually won it. So not only just for myself, but I mean, for our community of women, it's just, I'm just so honored that to be on that platform. And that kind of takes us to this journey of why, excuse me, sorry guys. So as Sefi said, I'm an Indigenous children's author and also a publisher. I have a 4-book children's series, specifically for, it was originally targeted specifically for just Indigenous children. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And how that's transpired into other things. But the original idea was to give Indigenous children something that one they could relate to. And just in my work background and everything else, I learned, and having sons, I started really, really observing men around me. And then I really started observing cultured men around me. And I started realizing that not only was there an issue with children of culture reading, there was an even bigger issue when it came to boys and men and literacy. And I was a mom struggling with that because I had a daughter who loved to read. She would read even the cereal box. She loved everything. But it seemed like a constant kind of struggle with my sons. And I mean, as moms and as hardworking moms, we really put a lot of effort into, especially, I don't know if we notice as women, we think we put a lot of effort into our daughters when in actuality, it's our sons. We, as moms, we put a lot of effort in, but the effort we're putting into them is always trying to figure out how to help them achieve. Like we're always, it's our daughters we seem to be putting on the passive, around responsibility and those kinds of things. And with our sons, it seems like we're always trying to find the key to achievement for them. We have to straighten their ties and their jackets and send them out in the world. So in that, I started really looking at, my dad, my brothers, my cousins, and children in general. When I went to high school, like I was raised on territory on reserve, I came into the city at about 5 or 6 when you start entering school. Went through the school system here. When I got to high school, it was interesting because they had always put me in ESL classes. I was always taking English as a second, and I know, see, everybody's like, wow. My whole school record says I am an ESL student. And that is because Haudenosaunee people, the accent is different, as I'm sure you can tell as I'm talking, and things like that. So they never took that into consideration when they were talking about, when they get to the table and talk about education and stuff. English was not my first language. Oneida was. And then I had learned English. And then now that I was in the school system, the only place they had to put me was in with ESL students. Forgetting that I was a child who spoke original language here. So English and all that was very, very difficult. I was in ESL. But then later on in high school, I met a teacher who turned me on to writing. And through my high school career, I took all kinds of back then it's kind of sad. They don't offer the same type of writing courses they did when I was in high school. I got to take, creative writing and all these different kind of things, and they don't offer that now. But even though I was still taking ESL, I was still pulling great marks in all these different writing things, because one thing I found with writing is you could kind of escape. You could go different places, especially in reading and writing and those kind of skills. So in that, in my love of reading, writing, I couldn't understand how I couldn't engage my sons. I couldn't get them to read anything. I couldn't even get them to read, to give you an example, my oldest son is very much into sports. I couldn't even get him to read like Sports Illustrated. He'd flip through, he'd look at all the pictures. He'd be like, yeah, I read that. And unfortunately, this seemed to keep going and going and going. So in trying to figure out how to engage my son and cousins and things like that, and in the education system, I was really working at helping in classrooms and things like this, and started really seeing, this, I want to say almost like a literacy bias, if that makes sense. Because again, you had a bunch of almost ESL students and culture students who were in one area of literacy, and then there was this other area. So I decided, okay, I can see a problem. I don't know how the problem existed and how to help in myself, and what can I contribute to help fix this. As a mom, I see other moms struggling with this, and again, not just with sons, their daughters too. There's a lot of daughters who have problems with literacy. So what is the grander picture here? Why is this happening? So when you look at the education system as a whole, especially here in Canada, the higher you go up in grades in the education system, the more the system is actually created for women. And the reason I say that is not even a bias. It's because at the times that these institutions were built, the only people in the seats that they could use to, you always have to have your student population that you survey and that kind of thing. We all had great grandparents, especially our grandfathers, who would say, I didn't go past grade 5 because I had to go work. I didn't go past grade 6. I think the highest level of education I heard when I was a child was maybe grade 8. If they made it to grade 8, they were educated. So then when you look at that and you look at high school and university, the only people there they could build the system around were girls. So of course, like any system, you're going to provide for who's there. So unfortunately, in taking that knowledge and looking at the system, then I started looking at things around book reports, when children get to pick books, those kinds of things. Why were boys so reluctant? Why were they not engaging? And then we went into the next area. We had a lot of children of culture who weren't engaging, and looking and understanding why that was either. And then myself, when we really started talking about, now I'm going to get into kind of a little bit of the personal journey of Indigenous life and where this took me, is when understanding about residential school really started putting light even more so on the education system and what that was doing to Indigenous students. And to give you an example, when I was younger, my mother, we had to move up north to mainly Western, well, it was an all Western community. We were the only Indigenous family there. It was a rural community. And it's interesting, as for Indigenous children, I don't think sometimes the situation the world makes us put our parents in is rather interesting. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example of every year in that school, they would take 1 week and we would do Indigenous studies. And I would be remember, They had put me in special education. I was an ESL student. I got picked on for that. So here's my time to shine. This I could absolutely, I knew everything about this. I was going to get straight A's. This was my week to shine. In retrospect, what that was about is, in that generation, if you ask, especially in the Western system, they always started that week of Indigenous studies with one movie, and that was part of curriculum. And that would start everybody's Indigenous Studies Week. And that movie is actually called Where the Spirit Lives. And it is about a young girl who was stolen and taken to residential school and forced to stay there. But every week, that 1 week, every year, I was so excited to do that week. I was so excited to watch that movie. I was so excited to talk to my friends about it. And that's what made me realize, wait a minute, why? If there's so much bad stuff in there, why was I so excited all the time? Because there was brown girls in it, and there was people who looked like my mom, and there was people who looked like my dad and my uncles, and they were singing songs I knew and could sing myself. That's what I was relating to. And the system doesn't see that that's where they put cultured children, especially Indigenous children. We did case studies where we took a group of boys and Indigenous boys, and we gave them money and we sent them into a book fair at a school. And it was interesting. The first round of boys that went in, they came all out with like, I don't know if you've been to a book fair, probably not in a long time, but they have the books, but they also have like the trinkety toy section where you can buy like the diggers and whatever. And I noticed every single one of these boys came out with the trinkety thing. Maybe one or two came out with an actual book, but if they could find something, or even a book that had the little character in it so they could take the character out and play with it, that's what they were after. Well, then we took the afternoon group and I put the Jane Gizmo books in there. And every single one of those boys came out with a book. And what I learned in that was, with my own experience and then an experience of watching these boys, was when you can't relate to something, you can't be drawn to it, no matter what. And what I mean by that is I very much advocate about appropriate cultural content for all children, not just Indigenous children. And the reason that is because culture is an individual identity. It's a community identity. It's a family identity, and it's not a cookie cutter situation. So for example, Robert Munch has taken all of his books and translated all 30 books into the Ojibwe language. And everybody can access them. You can buy them and that kind of thing. But if I was to sit here and say to you, now, because it's in an Indigenous language, I, as a female, can relate to the story of the paper bag princess. How does that look or sound? I can't. Just because the words are there doesn't mean I can relate to it at all. And that's where we went with this cookie cutter education thing in the way of ethnic groups and things like that. Right behind me, here are my characters, Jane Gizmo, for those who may not know the books. And I will, believe me, we will get into that. So these guys are the main interest, because what I wanted to create was a character that children could relate to, just being a character that they could see something of themselves in. And that's how we started with Jane Gizmo, is because Gizmo is a cat who just likes to be a cat. And in our community, We see a lot of what we call res dogs, but we don't see, at least in my community, I didn't see a cat until I actually came into the city at a friend's place. I had no idea what it was. So like it was almost so intriguing to me. Um, so even that we put a lot of thought into, giving them something new that they can explore, because a lot of Indigenous children don't really have that exploration with cats like Western children do. And then again, giving them a character that wasn't focused around trains, planes, science, things we tend to think boys are interested in. So that's why we have Jay. And Jay is a boy who just goes around the world exploring. In the books. Oh, and if I get talking too fast, or if anybody has a question, please, I don't mind being interrupted, believe me. And the more questions people have, that would be great. So here is a picture of the first book. And this book, actually, we have just re-brought it out in an English Ojibwe version. The first 3 books that we're going to talk about were all originally published in an English edition first. And what we're doing now is they're coming out in Ojibwe and other languages. We're working on many different Indigenous language dialects and other dialects, because just give me 1 second here in the book. So in book 1, one thing that I wanted to show is, I don't know if you can see. Yeah. We really, really focus, if you see in the background, you can see on Dad's feet, the moccasins. And you can see Jay's braids, and even on his shirt, the Thunderbird. And if you notice, Gizmo's not like your pristine cat, because again, he was found. So what we did is we dedicated ourselves to looking at every single aspect of what we could give children to feel included, to draw them, to make them feel like this is something that they wanted to gravitate to and bring into the life, especially boys, because we need something to kind of grab their attention. In that, with the boys getting interested, we did things like, in the beginning of the book, every single one of the Jay and Gizmo books starts with this. It says, this book belongs to. And the reason we did that is because children are all about ownership. My mom, my dad, my grandma, my toy. And when we don't look at the selfish side of that, that's actual connection and identity. So when we give a boy a book that he can put his name in, and it says, this book belongs to, then we change the script on them. And now it's, Mom, can you read me my book? And that gives them that connection and ownership to the book and to the people around him. That's the first connection we made, of connecting them. Again, as I said in the books, a lot of the background stuff we chose really, really, really like to center it around children and to really focus on what their needs are. So a lot of the adults, you don't really see like adults' faces in there. You see the, parts of them, the cultured parts, like you'll see moccasins in the background. One of the books is about boys and braids, and Jay's struggle with that. And his dad goes in and does a teaching circle in that. And again, just showing how communicating and sharing these cultural things can make it not so almost like entertainment, because, and I hate to say it that way, I don't know any other word to say it, but a lot of Indigenous stuff, especially with children, has become entertainment because there's no common place for it. And when I talk about that, it's like, would I come into somebody else's home, especially a cultured person's home. And as women, I'm sure a lot of the women can, when you decorate your home, when you put your home together, there's cultured pieces in your home, the artwork on your walls, or depending on your dishes, or depending, there's so many things. So it's difficult when our cultured children go into these very Western settings, including books, and there's nothing there that makes them feel that connection to anything they know. And in that, so we put so much into doing that with the series. What started happening is the series is now used in places like Guatemala, Philippines, Bangladesh, and there's teachers there using it to teach English and to teach proper Indigenous content. So that was the first part, is we had a problem. We had to address what the problem was, and we got to kind of a solution, the books. But that's where it couldn't end. In that, there were still bigger problems with Indigenous children in reading. The problem is I have Jane Gizmo to give them, but how do they access it? Most Indigenous communities do not have libraries. Most of the schools do not have libraries. And if they do, it's been books that have been brought in, of course, like Robert Munch's, his stories, all that kind of thing. So it still was not proper content. So again, we were back in the situation of how do we get content to them that they can relate to and other children can see. Example of that, there's lots of us who don't speak French, but we know a lot of French words. Why is that? The reason that is because you're exposed to it continually. You see it on signs, you see it on packaging, you see it everywhere you go. So in thinking about that, if we put Indigenous languages and proper content in proper places, what could possibly happen? And then we're back to the original peoples and the original languages and where that takes everybody, which I think we all know is we could spend a whole other Sunday afternoon speaking about where that would take us. So the next step in the project was, how do we get this out there? Especially for Indigenous children, because why would we ask the poorest people in the world to buy things to help their children in a system that was not broken by them? And that's when I got thinking, like myself, I didn't own my first brand new book until that teacher in high school gave it to me and started me on this whole writing path. And that's because, did I have books? Yes, that my cousins owned or my grands owned that were passed down to her. It is very rare that Indigenous children, unless they're urbanized, get brand new books because they don't have access to things where children would find brand new books, like bookstores, libraries. Those are things that do not exist in Indigenous communities. Or if they do, it's very few of them. I do know, like in this area, Walpole has a library. They are so lucky, but every other community around them does not. So we started the Gift of Literacy project, because the other thing we were coming into is we had a lot of very much older grandparents who were like, I see this. I've had grandmas and grandpas come up to my booth and look at the books and hear me talk. And then they start their own conversation of, their own children and the literacy issues, and then into grandchildren. And some of them, we've gotten right down into great grandchildren and the literacy issues that are still there. So they wanted to know, well, how do we help? We don't have littles anymore. And this all seems to be directed towards little kids. So here I was again with a problem. Children needed this, and there needed to be ways to get it. And I had these grandmas and grandpas that wanted to help, but didn't know how to get it to them. So that's how we started the Gift of Literacy Project, which can be found on my website. And what that is people can buy books, and we get them to Indigenous community and to children, or we get them to childcare centers where we know there will be Indigenous children there. And the reason that is because each book one is all just about Jay and Gizmo establishing their friendship and establishing their relationship. That's it, because that's the first part with anybody in friendship, relationships, those kinds of things, is cementing that friendship and where that was going to go, and the decisions around whether Gizmo was going to stay or not. And that's the other thing, is having books that boys can be the central focus, problem solving, and doing it in those productive ways. We need to see more and more of that. And I don't mean just in books. I mean in media in general. We need to see more boys showing positivity, making positive decisions, role modeling that. And again, like modeling behaviors around reading and proper problem solving and communicating. So that was how we established the first book. Book two, I know I got a bit of a glare. I'm hoping everyone can see it okay. And they can be seen on the website too. This one is actually about Jane Gizmo going to meet an Indigenous hoop dancer. And I know some of your community members have actually met my son, River Kristi White. He is an Indigenous hoop dancer that comes in. Oh, he loves your guys' community. But I was hoping that some of you would be excited to see that in book two, it actually features River. So in book two, Jay and Gizmo actually go to one of River's events. So not only do they get exposed to the hoop dancing and that, they also get exposed to, I'm not sure if you know, but River hoop dances for Indigenous children and adults with disabilities. He's a huge advocate, and that's actually the main thing that started Hoops for Hope. So book two is actually not only just about the hoop dancing, but inclusion, which a lot of children, it's been really effective because we're not showing autism as the main focus in the book. I'm not sure if if you get what I mean, but it's more about River, so kids gravitate to it better, because I don't know, like those who have met River know he's just like this big shining light. We call him our friendly giant. And so that's what is more drawn. So of course, because it's not, we always in our home, we don't talk about disabilities, we talk about abilities. And that's been a standing rule in my home forever. So it's the same thing with the book. We focus more on the hoop dancing and then going to, but we also put a piece in there just about inclusion, because children will pick that up. It's interesting what they will pick up in things that we don't. And then we have book three. This one, actually, they have been using. Book three is about Jane Gizmo Learn About Boys and Braids. And we wrote that book because we have so much difficulty with our boys, especially in the Western school system, around their long hair. And it was interesting when I was younger, again, back to trying to solve, like, not fully solve these issues for boys, but try and see where my boys were struggling. Again, in my own ignorance, I can say I didn't realize how many other cultures outside of Canada and other where the men had long hair. But I just knew that for our children in our communities, when they were, and some of ours, okay, so on Oneida, to give you an example, the school there goes to grade 6. And if everybody I know, like for me, that was a long time ago. But if you think back or try to grade 6, that's a crazy year for kids. That's like 12, 13. Yeah, that's a crazy year for parents, especially moms. But these kids are then, they have to go into town now to go to school. Now they're in Western school with Western children at that grade level and at that age. And that's like almost an upside down turn on top of what we already know about children at that age. So they go from being completely surrounded by everybody, you know, indigenous language, indigenous culture, indigenous everything, into this whole thing where you now have to almost be on a big treasure hunt to find anything that's indigenous and makes you feel like you belong or you're connected, other than what I call tokenisms. And again, that goes back to, if we just take things and say, well, I put an indigenous spin on it, that should make you comfortable. It's not exactly how it works, right? It's the whole, with any culture, any community, it's that whole cookie cutter theory. And it just doesn't work, because we have to take in, especially indigenous children, they connect to community, they connect to culture. Like, it's a broader spectrum of connecting. With Western society, I find, like, I live on my street. I think I know 4 or 5 neighbors. I try and be very neighborly because I do come from a community like that. But I also see it's not communal in the way of I know community. And that's where, especially boys, we have to think, if I can see a lot of yous on screen who all has sons. Sons have a hard time fitting in. They do find their crowd, but sons, you know, you send your daughter off to school, she's going to come back, she's going to tell you about the 5 friends you made. Because girls are given those skills, especially by their mothers, which is wonderful. Our sons do not connect the same way. And I'm sure every one of us who have sons know this. And in actuality, if we go into the next step, we see it with our husbands and we see it with our fathers. When men get together, if you watch closely, the first 3 minutes is like this weird, like, I don't know, it's like they're uncomfortable. Like, they're hugging awkwardly, they're like high-fiving awkwardly, they're like, you know. And as women, we all sit there, we think it's funny. And we see them do this continually. And that is because when they get in that space, even though these are their friends, that first start of that feeling connected and everything is a struggle for them. And that's why, because it's been a struggle through society for them. So now it's almost become a natural stance of, okay, unless we're to like playing ball or something, how do we do this? And it's because, okay, next thing, let's talk about birthday shopping. Everybody in here, I'm going to give you a task. We have to buy 1 girl present, 1 boy present. You have to start. I don't say you have to finish, but you have to start in a book section. In 5 minutes, you will have probably 4 things for that girl. You're ready. You can go buy the gift bag and the wrapping paper. But you still haven't found something for that boy. And now you're back over to where the baseballs are and the dinky cars and that's what that little boy is getting as a present from a mom, from an auntie, from a dad, from anybody. And we don't see how we ourselves feed into this boy problem in the way of, and that's what it just has a lot to do with, is we forget that as women, we need to feel connected. Men do too, but they just don't do it in the same way. And so because the system isn't set up in a way to really cater to them to know how to do this, they get awkward. Like, if you just throw them all out on a baseball field, if they know how to play baseball, oh, they're confident, they can just get out there and do it. But if you ask them to come out to dinner with us and they all have to stand at the table and, greet each other when everybody gets there, it becomes an awkward mess of men. And a lot of times it's even funnier because us girls don't notice because we too busy saying hi to our friends and hugging and going, oh my goodness, how are the kids? How are you? I miss you so much. Well, they're all over there going, so, hey man, like, how was work this week? And what's new? So again, just making new space for men, especially our husbands, our sons. And as women, we have to lead that space. I know that sounds funny, but we do, because again, it's just a matter of fact of when you watch girls in that space, we figured out, we know how to do this with our daughters. So I'm positive we will figure out how to do this with our sons. But we have to remember that we've put a little more work on one side than the other. And boys need those skills. They need to be able to read and write. We forget that even if they're in men's trades, there's paperwork, there's office meetings. And when we're giving them the tools to go into that meeting with a ball and glove versus literacy skills, then we have a huge world problem. And that's why a lot of men, like when you look at contract negotiations, at the end of time, in the back doors, we all know it's the women who went to the table and said, okay, so you want this on this side, and you want this on this side, and you come to the table. And why is that? It has nothing to do with anybody being better than anybody else. Everybody's sharing a skill set. It's just the fact that we've honed into giving a certain skill set to girls more than boys. And it's just like vice versa. I'm sure lots of us have put more time into our boys playing sports than our girls because they've done other things. So it's just this natural thing of where we kind of, when we're going, we get off balance, right? With stuff like this. So we need to bring them back on board because, again, in partnership, you want some equalness there for everybody to be able to participate and bring into that jointly, right? I have this whole thing that I say when my kids talk about relationships, because I'm an Indigenous female, is my look on it is you hustle, they hustle, we hustle. Because that's how a relationship should go. And so that's the thing, is we have to remember that if we don't give these boys the skills to do their part of the hustling, then that's why we keep getting into this whole thing of men feeling like failures, or men feeling like they can't communicate effectively in relationships. Why they feel they need to communicate the way a lot of men feel they need to communicate. Like they're not being heard, even though you hear them. They turn to, especially young boys. You get, especially moms, I'm sure the ones with sons in here get, those screaming matches and those things where, we feel inappropriate and disrespectful. But then do we look at the skill sets we've actually given them to communicate with us? And that's where I've had to look with my own sons and say, if you don't have the skills to do this, how can I expect you to do it? And that was part of the issue. Girls pick up by reading and being exposed to things and being around their friends and things like that. But again, every book usually used in the education system has a female center focus, who is problem solving, who is communicating, who is the superhero, whether it's in the background or the foreground. So the problem with that is that doesn't give the boys that superhero feeling that they can problem solve effectively. They can communicate effectively. They can be an effective person. And then when we get into the language of the books, again, that just has to do with connecting Indigenous children like me. I lost my grandfather when I was 12. And at that point, I pretty much went from being completely immersed in culture to no culture, and lost most of my language. Because he was the one who taught me. He was the one I conversed with. Everybody else, due to residential school, everybody else I'm around isn't fluent. my nation, our language is one of the most extinct languages. And so that's why we're working really hard at translating the books. And that's why when people say about Jane Gizmo, I call it a social enterprise, because in Western world, you have to have some sort of business name. And so the government lately was nice enough to realize that some of us just don't fit under your typical business model, because under your typical business model, people think that especially children's authors make a lot of money. Well, number one, they don't. Most children's authors actually get into it for children, absolutely. But the other thing is too, is the fact of giving credit to those businesses like mine when it comes to Indigenous communities. What a social enterprise is essentially I take everything I make and give it back to community in one way or another, whether it's producing the next book, you know, getting it out to little libraries, that kind of thing. That's where all, like when I have my GoFundMe, things like that, this is a community project, because in figuring out this problem, I learned I couldn't fix it on my own. I had part of a solution, but not the whole solution, because I couldn't get it out everywhere. I'm just one person. And I had already put everything I had into it, which I think we know for especially Indigenous women, that's what happens with business. So that's why they gave us the title of social enterprise. So that way, you know, and I'm educating people more and more on that wording, because I think it's important for people to understand what social enterprises are, like Jane Gizmo. And that the fact that everybody who helps contribute to this contributes to the next book out. It contributes to children getting this book in their hands. It contributes because this system will, they're not going to actively do it on their own for our children, because the system was not created. They've been fine with the system for this long. So they will not fix systems that they don't see as broken. So unfortunately, because Robert Munsch comes from a system that is working for them, they still very much feel that bringing in Robert Munsch books versus somebody else's. And that's why I ended up having to go into the publishing end of my stuff, was because I needed this out to the children. I needed this out to parents. And big publishing places, all they wanted at the end of the day was lots and lots of money. And they didn't believe in the project because they could not understand that. They could not understand because they weren't cultured kids. They couldn't understand that even if one little boy picked up this book and was like, hey, that's pretty cool, I was okay with that. And I just needed a supportive team. So what I decided is, again, through social enterprise, I applied to become a Canadian publisher and was granted the status of Canadian publisher here in Canada. And now I'm working with language centers to do books, even just for their own, like little books that they're putting together and printing in their own communities, just for their own kids. I can help with that now because I did take that stance and went into publishing. But in that, I will explain, as a woman, that's where the system gets hard. I never wanted to be a publisher. And yes, that's a huge, I'm sure lots of people are like, wow, that's a huge accolade to be an Indigenous Canadian publisher. And absolutely it is. And I am so grateful to have that title. But I didn't come across that title because it was actually in the goals. I actually had to become a publisher so I could get Jane Gizmo out to kids, because there was no other way around it. When Western kids are little, they always have heroes or children's characters. And I'm sure even now, if anyone has littles, Paw Patrol, oh man, I could go on and on. I got a 5-year-old here. We could do Baby Shark Song. And that's wonderful. And that's what brings a lot of kids through things. But my main goal is, if I could depict in the future what I would like to see for especially Indigenous, but not just into all cultural children, because as I said, remember, there are boys all over the world relating with this boy because he looks like somebody they know. All over the world. That opened my eyes as an Indigenous woman. Because when I was getting people in Bangladesh and stuff like that, wow, it knocked my socks off. I had no idea. I've learned so much. And that's why my whole goal, if I could close my eyes and just wish upon a star, would be that Jane Gizmo would be just about any place a child would come across them. Because every Indigenous child in the world has a right to feel connection to community. And every little girl like me needs to understand she can win that award. She is worth it. And every Indigenous boy can see your life at the end has meaning, and you can have goals too.
I had a question, Kristi.
Absolutely.
So we were talking about literacy today, right? And there's different types of literacy, right? It's not just reading books and stuff like that. And
Absolutely.
Obviously you're at a young child age that's critical to get kids with a book in their hands and they can look at words on the page and connect to that, right?
Yep.
But I've come out to a couple ceremonies with you guys, and like I have a master's in fisheries ecotoxicology. So when I'm talking to people like water walkers, and they make a comment about water, I can appreciate mechanistically that that's a graduate ecotoxicology concept.
Right.
But they're talking to 5-year-olds about it.
Right.
Right. So Indigenous kids in culture, in context, in ceremony have types of literacy that they're exposed to at earlier ages that are important to other cultures as well too.
Yes.
And it's not always like a lack of literacy, but it's also types of things, right? But like statistical literacy might not be something that you'd ever give to a 5-year-old, right?
Right.
So one of the biases I see a lot of the times when you look at a series like Jane Gizmo is they don't see the whole curriculum from K to 12.
Yeah.
They see one thing, right? But how?
Okay, so I'm going, actually, you jumped me.
sorry to jump.
So that was my next thing of how Jane Gizmo actually transpired to in this whole connection, and why Indigenous children need to feel connected is when the books originally came out and they made me put them in an age category. I had to go through their Western system and sit there and go, well, based off of all the information that's here, this would be a book for, grades JK to grade 3, I think is what they have it listed as, 2 or 3. And I know a lot of you are like, she doesn't know. No, I don't know, because I don't pay attention. And I'm going to get into that next. The reason I don't pay attention is because what has happened with the book is I have just as many teenagers and adult readers of Jane Gizmo as I do little children. I have Indigenous teenagers who have bought the books to read to their siblings because they can connect with it. And therefore, it starts that storytelling thing. I've had dads who have struggled with literacy who buy the book, especially Boys in Braids, because it's that connection with the dad going in and doing a talking circle. He, as Will brought up, it's a good question. That dad's literacy skills and at his age are probably not going to really, really come up to where, somebody like me would like them to be. But his literacy skill is still being amped because what's drawing them to it is that cultural piece, like that talking circle. And that's literacy. They know that talking circle space. They know that communicating space. So again, that's drawing them in on a different literacy level to share and teach their young children, boys and girls, this new stages of literacy that they find in the book, because the kids' brains are connecting with the literacy they find in the book. And then adult brains are connecting with a different kind of literacy they're finding in the book. By having certain things in the book, it also triggers literacy for adults who have issues with literacy. We made the pictures so that should we have, say, a dad who wants to try, but knows he can't read those words, we've made the pictures, we looked at it, and we didn't want just plain pictures, if that makes sense. We wanted something that a mom or a dad if they were struggling with literacy, could sit there and make up the story and not feel uncomfortable. The pictures not only speak to our kids, but we made sure they spoke to an adult in a way that if they do struggle with literacy, they could still read to their children until of the age. And then what happened is I have one family, I can tell you what happened. Dad was making up the story until the child got, because the books have actually been out for about 6 years now. And a lot of people, and that's what I mean about why I need help with this project from all communities, because Jane Gizmo literally we've been doing this for about 6 years. And again, because there seems to be some stigma around giving proper content to Indigenous children and every policyholder, education system, everything, because they think there's no flaws in their system, are kind of opposed to coming to the table and listening. But I will tell you, anybody who's gotten these books in their hands see the value in them. They love them, even themselves. And that's what I mean. The pictures, we made sure that it speaks to. So what we had is this father and child. The father would make up the stories until the child was of an age to read. And then what started happening is, because the son figured out what was going on, like, wait a minute, that's not the right story. That started a conversation. And that son is now teaching his father basic literacy skills. And it's become a connective, non-judgmental space for them to work and grow on that together. Because I hate to tell the women in the room, but you may know a man who's completely illiterate and has faked his way past you. We all think we're as good as the FBI. I learned, even in the last few years, that I have multiple men around me who have zero literacy skills. And I had no idea. The most I can do is probably sign their name on the bottom of the form. But they have trades. One was an iron worker, built magnificent skyscrapers, could do math like anything, but it's a different type of literacy. And it goes back to what Will was saying about different types of literacy. Math is a very different type of literacy than reading. So yes, he could be an iron worker, but he couldn't sign his contracts for those jobs. Like, he couldn't read through them. All he could do was sign and say, yeah, I'll do the work. Tell me what you need done. And because men communicate that way, we don't see that. They may not be able to. Here's an example, ladies. How many of us have gone to someplace like IKEA? You buy the thing that has to be put together, or even a shop thing, whether it's the snowblower or whatever. And we're going to let our husbands do it, or our sons. We're going to take a walk and we're going to come back and they messed it up. Are y'all with me? You know. And what is the first thing we're going to say? Did you not read the instructions? And when's the last time you bought your son or a husband a book? And that's the problem we get into, is unfortunately, a lot of men in our system have learned to fake it until they make it. And Indigenous men, you have to remember, they survived a whole system of genocide. They really figured out how to fake it till you make it. They figured out how to fake their way through education systems. They figured out how to fake their way through trades. This is what we know of the Indigenous history and life, especially here in Canada. Men who persevered through tons of things. But while they were persevering, the last thing anyone was thinking about is their literacy skills, because they were just surviving. And now we have boys that are going through education systems where now the standards are higher. At one point, if we had one Indigenous student graduate a year, that'd be huge. I mean, those numbers are growing, which is amazing, but we can't keep having the expectations of those numbers growing, but not giving them skills to keep up.
I have a question too. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, but I'm going to throw it at you because I really appreciate all the analysis that you showed at the beginning, the problem solving skills you went through to, you know, figure out what the problem is, like from your own observations with your own children, and then put together a solution, then make a team, create a team to do it, and then overcome all the obstacles in getting the book out that you created. So when I got the book, I was so excited, and I loved how it said on the back with these 5 things about it, that it has a male central character, a book that the children can own, and even if they cannot read it yet, it has action and adventure and problem solving, and portrays a child who is reading, which is so important. And then with vocabulary that allows the parents to read the book to their children, which is to allow the parent to model. But there's one thing that I noticed more than that, as I was looking through it, is that I realized the parent in the story is the dad.
Yes.
And so you have the boy with the dad, and the intention behind that was so strong for me. And I was wondering, I mean, I know I'm a children's teacher, and so I go through children's books a lot, but I haven't done this, you know, explicitly. I was wondering, have you done or come across any surveys of children's literature that can tell us how often it is that you have a boy child with their father as the central parent and that connection of fatherhood?
Yeah. So I will give you actually, Sleep, that's wonderful, because honestly, you're right. And I'm so glad. Actually, I think it's been a while since somebody went, hey, and it's so true. So one thing I realized in giving boys back the sense of connecting and all of that is, to give an example, as I said, I got a 5-year-old in my home, and he's actually a kinship boy. So, and I'm grandma and my husband is grandpa, like Papa. Our roommate, this little boy chose him as dad. So he's now raising him, and he's now 5. I had been doing Jay and Gizmo for quite a while, and I just really wanted male center focus, that real good relationship with dad. And I knew it was important, but I will honestly tell you, I didn't know how important until I went through the next life of the experience of this 5-year-old and his dad. You are absolutely right. Other than Jay and Gizmo, there are very, very few books. And actually, this whole time I was talking to you, I was trying to think of one I could throw at you to say, oh, this one. You're right. And that's also a thing we have to look at as moms, is that the whole world, when children are at this age of Jane Gizmo that people are putting them into, like early years, right? We now have healthy men coming up in many communities that may not have been there before. So now roles are changing. And one thing I really did notice is with these two, it's really hard. There is absolutely nothing focused, just dad and kid that's positive, unless dad's a super villain blowing everything else, traipsing his kid through dynamite, which to me is not proper problem solving, by the way. And I'm sure as a teacher, you know where that goes. So again, and I'm sure you know too, as a teacher, the problem is more boys are connecting with their dads on games like GTA. And that too is because everywhere you go, if you notice now, even magazines, the front of magazines will always be a mom and child.
Yeah, the dads don't know that they have something to give to their kids.
Right. So that's why.
Like you said, you know, earlier, that the men, when they meet each other, don't kind of have this awkwardness, don't know how to talk to each other. The same awkwardness is with their sons. It's like, well, you know, well, I guess we'll go fishing. But no, fishing isn't something you do anymore, you know, so.
But actually, Jane Gizmo will be.
It is. I know, you're changing the culture.
Because again, it's things like that. You're right. You know what? Boys are silly. When boys get together, they're silly, whether they're little or adults. And as a teacher, I'm sure you know that. So again, even in the one book where Jay and Gizmo becomes best friends, one thing we were talking about is, I'm sure you see in your book, the string on the stick and how kind of, if you open it up and you really kind of look at that, it's not smooth. It's kind of awkward. You can tell like Jay's kind of like, okay, what am I doing here? You see what I mean? And it's because that's how boys are. And that's what I want them to see, is that even if they're awkward and they're not perfect at this, they still have these great skills to bring. Dads and sons. And I think, see, exactly. We purposely made Jay go through these experiences where these boys can see, you don't have to be pristine. You don't have to be all put together. You still have value, you still have space, and you still deserve connection within this world. And that's essentially why we have so many more so dads and sons connecting around it. But I will tell you, it has taken a world of its own. We have all kinds of, I mean, grandparents and children and moms, and like, it's been an incredible journey. I'm not sure if anybody knows where Moose Factory is. I think that was my first world vision of a friend of mine is also a children's author and had gone to Moose Factory. And I had been, really plunging away at Jane Gizmo for about 3 years at this point. And he had tagged me in a post. And I woke up and I thought, well, I wonder what this is about, because he doesn't really do that kind of thing. So I opened it up, and my book, the first Jane Gizmo book, was actually the book of the month in Moose Factory's library that they had just opened.
Mm.
And I had I don't even know, because of the gift of literacy. The crazy thing is, I don't know how I got to Moose Factory, because again, I'll have teachers that'll come by and be like, you know what? I have a friend who teaches way blah, blah, blah. That's how they ended up in Guatemala. One of the teachers there is an actual Guatemalan teacher, but was friends with a teacher who had come over to teach ESL. And she had one of my books just in her repertoire of books. And so the boys, because again, being quote unquote brown boys, all they see, brown boy and cat. So they started realizing their boys were getting interested in this, and the teacher went, okay, can we get some more? And so it's really, as I said, the social enterprise of teachers and mothers and fathers and grandparents. And it's been so surprising that the people who do see the books and see the value of it and see the value in our children, especially cultured children, they love to be part of it. I'm always posting because they want to be part of it. They want to see where this adventure is going. And I just love the fact that it's become such a community thing, that I'm kind of bringing a whole community along with me and all these different adventures. Like we were just some man who actually is a reporter for Indigenous community got a hold of my books and did a TikTok. And I am not technological. So I woke up to like my phone world going crazy. I had no idea what was going on. I had to call my children, and they're like, oh, you're streaming on TikTok. And I was like, that's a good thing, right? So yeah, I'm your typical put me in with a bunch of kids. We're good. 5-year-olds, they're the best. I think 5-agers is what I call them now, because they all think they're 5 teenagers. They're wonderful. But again, like, it was because he was an Indigenous male who who got the book Boys in Braids. And he just had to say something about it. And that's all I ask when I present to anybody or anything. When you get your books, please, if somebody comes over for coffee, just say, hey, have you happened to see these 2 characters, Jay and Gizmo? Because that's what's going to take them around the world. That's what's going to make them commonplace everywhere. And that's how we make it commonplace. We don't wait for the system to make it commonplace. They only make their own stuff.
Can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
I've been holding on to questions for the whole week, and I'm gonna first say I'm really excited to that you did sort of answer this one. So I'm just gonna go over like when I first picked it up, it said proud Haudenosaunee woman. And then I went, but wait, it's an Ojibwe. And so, but, and so I just wanted to quickly touch on that and go, I really hope that your project manages to get it translated into Oneida. I'm going to pray especially for that to happen, because I'm sure that's very important to you.
It is.
My question right now that I want to ask is, how did you meet Sherry? Can you talk about that partnership? Because we've been talking about these pictures and the genius behind them. And look, this is my favorite one. It's all so black, and yet
and the crazy thing is
in there.
If you look up Sherry's bio there, so yeah, it's two ethnic women who came together because, again, her being an African female, realized even in her own community, they had no real children's characters that they could relate to. And then essentially she's a social worker. Like, she went and took fine arts first, and of course, unfortunately, being an ethnic female, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is the next part of the project. When you have two ethnic females working on something, it makes it really, really hard to get the project to take off. I think you understand what I mean, because any table we sit at, we're still the ethnic girls in the room. So what Sherry did is, you see, she's done amazing, amazing, amazing artwork. But of course, I'll give you an example for myself. There's all these awards and stuff that are given out for books and children's books and things like that, and lists and whatever. We would have to work really hard to get Jane Gizmo on that kind of thing, because at the end of the day, Robert Munsch gets to be Robert Munsch, the children's author, and I get to be Kristi White, the Indigenous children's author.
Mm-hmm.
And they will forever put us in that boat. So what happened is, as beautiful and talented and skilled as she is, she ended up having to go back to school and become a social worker. So both of us right now are trying to almost tackle a system from the inside as ethnic women. There's many people. As funny as please go give my, I love that you brought up Sherry, please go give my artist, like, she's on Facebook under Voltafish. That's her artwork. It's very unique and different, I will say. But when you look at Jane Gizmo, a lot of it is, again, as another ethnic woman, and not really, I guess, getting, I don't want to say the accolade, because we really don't care about that, the big accolade, but it's a fact that we both put so much time, effort, and skill set into a project to give to children and community. And the fact is, every time we sit at a table, we're just two ethnic girls sitting at the table. What would we know?
And what's important is also that those accolades and prizes give you visibility, which then increases the extent of people that will be affected. So did you say Voltafish? How do you spell that? VOL?
Yeah, VOLTA, and then fish as in like fish. FISH.
Okay, I just put it in the chat in case people want to.
Or Shari Campbell. And I mean, she's amazing. She's actually done other children's books too. But again, I think because she is an African female, I don't think she gets a lot of the recognition that I honestly believe she should get. We've worked really, really, like, she's an amazing artist. Like, again, even you can tell the cookie cutter piece was taken away, because we are still both ethnic girls, but it's very different ethnicities. And look at how well we were able to communicate to bring this Indigenous boy to life, right? And what we see in that.
His emotions and the cats are just, that's
and we're working right now. We're hoping that with the gift of literacy and things, hopefully it grows a little bit bigger, because we do have one book that is just about ready to come out, and Jane Gizmo Go to Powwow. And I'm really hoping to get that out and get that to the kids, because I think it's another piece of the whole thing. So I want to get back to actually something you had asked about and the Haudenosaunee part. Because I actually really did want to answer you on that. So one of the things is I'm not sure if a lot of people know, Oneida only has one settlement on this side of the water. That's why we're actually rather very different than Ojibwe. So this is why I tell people when I go into this, it kind of shows when you look at somebody's project and you have questions like that, it can show where their heart, spirit, and intent comes from. And it was a fact that across Canada, there are tons more Ojibwe children than there are Oneida children. And in my own home community, I help down there. We have our own language center. The books are being used in that way instead of publishing, because again, my community is trying to be so respectful of the fact they get that this isn't, it's not cheap or easy or anything, especially for an Indigenous female, because again, that now goes back into a lot of people don't realize that books, publishing, all of that stuff is still very much a men's industry. And so unfortunately, me and Sherry run into this position of we're two girls in a men's industry talking about boys. So we literally just some people, and that's where it comes to the award, because there have people who look and go, oh my goodness, girls, are you, because as educators, I'm sure, Celine, if anybody had questions about this from an educator, you would say, this is a trailblazing, fire smoking, like the world has ever seen, two ethnic girls take on the men's world in this capacity, because it is still very much a men's industry. The whole part of it, writing, as you see, if you look up Indigenous authors, there's few and far between. And then when you get into the publishing end of it, even more. And I wasn't aware of how that was still so much a men's industry until my friend, who is a children's author, is also a male, went, what are you doing? Do you know? And I'm like, of course I do. Watch. Because again, when you have spirit and faith and trust in something that you believe in, especially when it comes to children, I'm all in. Because you know what? If I can help one kid that is no longer going to celebrate a week based around a movie around residential school, and we can just go and hang out and play with Jay and Gizmo and have fun, then that's what I will continue doing till the end of time. And if it takes every ounce of me, I will, because a lot of people, if you're not in the education system, I don't think a lot of people really realize that literacy in children make up a good part of their life. And when they struggle with literacy and identity, that causes lasting implications. And that's where we get why we have the highest number of Indigenous men in institutions like jails and stuff like that. Again, what tools were they given originally through the system to be positive, supportive role models and know that they're worth it? As a teacher, Celine, I'm sure you've come across those boys who you have all the, I'm going to get emotional. Sorry, girls. I've had an emotional weekend. Those boys that you, Celine, seen every worth in, but you knew because they couldn't see their own worth. That's what was going to get to them. And this is what I teach people. You can give somebody just about anything in the world, but do you know the one thing you cannot give them? Does anybody know? One thing you cannot give somebody. Courage. You can give somebody love. You can give somebody support. You can give them food. You can give them shelter. As a teacher, you can give them all kinds of things. But the one thing you cannot give them is courage. Courage has to come from within for anybody. And boys and courage comes from a really good rooting system. And that rooting system comes from feeling like they belong, feeling like they're worth it, feeling like they're bringing something worthwhile to the table. And we see so many boys by the time they enter high school who have already thrown in the towel on their worth. They won't even give it a shot. And that's why if I have to put Jay and Gizmo into an age category, then I'll put it into the young boys. But those young boys are going to bring a whole bunch of these older boys with them on quite the journey of Jay and Gizmo. And all I ask all of you is the next time you go shopping, please buy a boy a book. I don't even matter what the book is. You don't know. They may like it. Just try. A ball and a book. I'll even compromise. I was going to say, is there any other questions? I can see the chat, but I'm not sure.
I don't think there were any other questions in there specifically. Now is the time. It's now 3:25. We've already taken quite a bit of Kristi's time. So are there any other burning questions? You were very gracious in that you allowed people just to raise their questions as you went along.
Absolutely. Especially because I think sometimes creator just kind of puts something in us. And I think what happens, and honestly, I'll just take 2 minutes and I promise I'll let you guys go, but 2 minutes to even just talk about that for a second. In the fact of with Haudenosaunee especially, we have two sides of a table and two people, like you talk back and forth and communicate and that kind of thing. And with children, I will always, when I go and do book presentations and things like that, I take little breaks in that and just say, is there any questions or anything? Because one thing I realized when I was a kid is if I had a question and I had to sit and wait till it was question and answer period, either A, I forgot the question and I felt silly with my hand going, or I didn't catch the rest of the presentation because I was trying to remember the question I had. Like Celine, she's probably got a pen and paper and she was like, I better write this down because by the time Kristi's done talking, see? So exactly. I will always, anytime you guys have me come, please feel free to jump in because again, I don't want anybody missing anything because they have a question to ask. Is that Ali? It is.
Yes, it's me.
Hi,
Segoli.
Segoli. Oh my goodness. I miss you so much. Mwah.
Yeah. I'm so happy to see you, my friend. You know, it's been a while, but as you know, we had an honor to have River a couple of times. Yes, with your permission, I know that. So, and hopefully one day we can do all those things physically, you know, face to face. I'm not a Zoom person. I grew up hugging people. Yes.
Me too. Well, Ali, you know me, so I'm sure you know this is not ideal for me at all.
I would love to have you one day at home, maybe for a Persian food, you know.
So Ali, I have a question as a man at the table. When's the last time you bought a book?
Yes, for sure. I have two grown-up boys actually. But what your talk make me thinking of my own mother. I have to acknowledge that I learned a lot from her.
Yeah.
And even though I'm cooking at home, I'm the cook.
Yeah.
And it seems like my mother is beside me. No matter what I do, it just I learned so much from her. I'm not saying I didn't learn anything from my father. You know, a lot of sacrifices. My mother has a big role in my life, still up to today. She passed away about 15 years ago, but she's an important role in my life, and it was and it is, and I think it's going to be for the rest of my life.
Yes.
And you're right. And you're absolutely right. I just want to say, thank you to make me thinking of all that beautiful memories that I have from my mother.
Exactly. And even that, Ali, like when you were saying it, just it feels so weird when we were talking about cooking, because some quote unquote men do not see that. And as soon as you said that, the literacy piece, the reading the instructions and listening to her talk, and I need, this much this, and I need to do this. It's still a connection of literacy between two people. And it's a connection of literacy that we don't realize that we hold so dearly to ourselves. I'm sure everybody in here, if you do cook, whether it was with your mom or your dad, that's what you took from that and that's why I'm saying those connections. And thank you, Ali, for sharing that, because that's a good example of how those literacy connections, especially with children, are so important. And that's what we're missing, is that connection. It doesn't have to be specifically around reading, but you have to have that connection around literacy. So, and that is a perfect example of a good literacy for boys, is that cooking and spending time. Like River, most of his cooking skills, of course, he got from me, right? So again, it's those things where we have to look at literacy different to connect our families again. And I'm so glad, and I bet you now, with thinking of that, you'll see now, you'll be able to later remember those things with your kids, where it may not have looked exactly like literacy, but it is, whether it was you making up that dad story when you're driving down the road, right? And it's where you take these children in that literacy journey of connecting them and making them feel connected, right? Like with River, that connection of, he just that bright light because he feels so connected to everybody. And I wish every child felt that. I just wish everybody could be like River, just be this big light, right? But it's because he understands that connections are so important. People are so important, no matter where they come from. And these children just need to feel like they're connected and they're important, especially boys. And it doesn't matter if it's a connection with mom or dad, but they need to remember those connections so they can sit here and go, you know what? I love to cook because of my mom. And there's that literacy part. I'm sure she taught you how to measure things. And she taught you how to read those recipes and how to fix mistakes if you messed it up. And that's why you feel her there, is because Ali, even when you mess up, she's there. She's got you because she taught you how to fix it. You throw a potato in because you put too much salt in, and she's there.
Yeah, for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Especially her forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so much love. Yeah. It is. Yeah. Thank you so much. You seriously, you're just kind of like you're able to push me farther way back in my memories as a child.
And that's what we need.
To think about my mother. Yeah.
Because if you look around the world right now, Ali, when I was little, the world was so much more oriented to children and family. And like right now, if we wanted to take our children somewhere that was, screamed children, fun, family, you'd have to Google and really search for some place to go. When I was a kid, you drove down the street and the McDonald's characters were all out there. I mean, you had French fry guys waving at you, right? Whereas now, the world's lost that connection with children and we don't see it. So I need to keep doing this so I can say, Ali, who taught you how to cook?
Anyway, Kristi, please accept my virtual hug.
Any other questions? I don't want to keep everybody. I feel like I'm keeping everybody today.
We're all enjoying it tremendously.
Yeah, I think it's because of COVID, and you can ask Ali, our communities. I mean, we're trying, but I mean, we've actually been pretty closed down for a while because we've had infections in different communities and stuff. So when I get into things like this, it's nice because it's like, oh, I get to see everybody.
It's so lovely that we actually have this opportunity to connect.
I actually have to go and start cooking. Speaking of cooking, so.
Absolutely.
I'm thankful and so grateful for this. I was looking forward all week.
So I was so excited actually. You get asked Seppi last night. I was like, I'm so ready.
Andisha, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Kristi. I'm also a teacher. I teach grade 6 actually. So
Oh,
I know what you meant when you said that's a very interesting age. Yeah,
is.
it's a very critical age. Actually, I was wondering, have you published any of these? Have you been able to publish them on online libraries like Epic for kids? Or I'm not sure how successful or how hard it is to get in on those, but there are some good online libraries that teachers have access to and the kids have access to as well. I was just wondering about that.
Okay, can I ask what board you're with?
Thames Valley.
Okay, in that case, for you here, it's actually easier because your preferred vendor is Good Minds and they carry all the Jane Gizmo books.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, and that's what I mean. A lot of teachers don't realize that when I say, oh, if you're down this part of Ontario, you know, for Indigenous stuff, the preferred vendor is Good Minds. And then people are shocked. Yes, Jane Gizmo is absolutely available at Good Minds through your guys' preferred vendor system. It's a matter of getting the teachers, the principals, and the libraries to bring them in.
Okay.
So what we did actually, to give you an example, through the Gift of Literacy, the Optimist clubs here in London, actually they bought books and gifted them to a bunch of the schools so that they could have one set in their library and one set into their primary class. So some of the schools here in London do have them if they are connected with the Optimist program.
Okay. Okay, great. It's funny you mentioned Good Minds. I was looking them up because I know I'd bought actually books at a book fair many years ago from them.
Yeah.
But is their website still goodminds.com? I wasn't able to. Yeah. Okay.
Is it GOOD and then capital MINDS?
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll try that then.
And then the other thing is too, is for teachers, school camps, all those kinds of things, we do bulk discount on distribution because we do, the only distributor other than myself that is active right now is Good Minds.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thanks for your time.
That's good to know. I think at this point, it's we're really due to do a huge gratitude to Kristi White. Kristi, now I know why you actually won that very prestigious award. And this is by far the greatest celebration we could have had for the International Women's Day, to showcase one of our outstanding Indigenous women who is actually living within our community. And it's been a real pleasure and an honor to know you. You're clearly a trailblazer in the arena of education, which is so important because education is the only hope we have, right?
Yeah.
Of raising up a generation of people who are conscious of the purpose of their lives and who are comfortable, as you say, within their own skin, with their identities, you know, with who they are, and conscious of the tremendous role they have to play in bringing about peace and unity and harmony between all of us. And this, we wish you all the best in this social enterprise that you have started. I know your books have already been translated into a number of languages, and hopefully they will become even more widespread. And we wish you all the best in producing more and more of these books, which are helping particularly our boys and young people to really be able to express themselves in this society. And we of course encourage everyone to purchase these books. The website is there, and I'm really hoping that this is the start of a long-term collaboration between all of us, to see how we could support you, how you could support us, how you could help us learn more about all these very important aspects of life. And we are really looking forward to seeing you again very soon. And we've many of us have already bought some books, and we will see how we could we could, you could help us also bring this to our community.
Yes.
And to the children of our community. I think
exactly.
This is hugely important.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for everybody spending their time with me. And just quickly, Ali, before you leave, something else to think about is your communication at the grocery store, because I've seen you in a grocery store. And that is your happy place to communicate. And if you think about that, so again, thank you so much for everybody coming out and spending the afternoon with me, and enjoy going and cooking and spending time with your families, and just have a wonderful afternoon. And Ali, I will see you at a grocery store soon.
And hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person next time.
Yes, absolutely. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you.